but maybe we can start by just an introduction to who you are and what you do from each of the panelists. Sophie, would you like to go first?
Hey everyone, I'm Sophie. Happy Monday. I can hardly believe it's April at the end of this week. I'm like, where is time going? But I'm Sophie. I am the founder of Scotland's first and only Black female-owned social media agency. I'm also on the Creative Scotland Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Advisory Group and on a few other councils across the UK, including BEMA, which is the British Interactive Media Association, and British Council Arts Advisory Board as well. I hope all my years of slogging away in this industry, this creative industry, for what my sins are worth, I hope tonight I'll be able to hopefully give you some insights into what it's like creating a campaign, developing a campaign for clients. Please pick my brain. Sometimes during lockdown, I feel like my brain is a bit redundant. So ask away and hopefully I can be some help.
That's great. Thank you so much. Karen, let's go to you next.
Hi everyone, I'm Karen. I'm a trainer. I work at an organisation called Campaign Bootcamp, and our mission is to give people who experience systems of oppression and injustice the skills that they need to tackle the issues that are facing them in their lives. I think I'm the only one on this panel who's not based in Scotland. I'm based down in London, and in my spare time I also run a community called POC in Nature, which is really aimed at getting people of colour to have more deeper conversations about our relationship with nature, and being in green spaces and the environmental movement. And I'm also a recovery advocate. And yeah, that's it from me.
Thank you so much. Kirstin, how about you?
Hi, my name is Kirstin. I do a lot of different things, social media, digital marketing, PR, content creation. I work as a photographer as well. Currently, I'm working for the Stove Network, who is hosting this session. I work as their communications manager. I also work for Dumfries Music Conference. I work as their digital media manager. And most recently, I've started working for Mid-Steeple Quarter, which is a community benefit society who are focused on a specific area in Dumfries High Street and buying empty buildings, refurbishing them and regenerating the high street. Yeah, so I've been actively involved in the sort of ever-expanding cultural scene of Dumfries for about 6 years now. So worked on a lot of different campaigns, looking forward to sharing what I've learned, and also really looking forward to learning from Karen and Sophie as well.
Lovely, thank you so much. I'm going to start, and I apologize, but my first question already includes the word lockdown. I think we have to get it out of the way and talk about this. How has lockdown, how has the novel coronavirus affected your work and the type of work and campaign that you work on? If anyone wants to take that, I'd love to hear more.
Yeah, I think lockdown for me personally has been really, really tough, mentally as well, not being around people. So I think that in itself has been like a huge, how do you find the creative energy and inspiration when mentally you're feeling drained to deliver great campaigns? And usually I'm somebody that, you know, loves to meet up with people, you know, that human interaction. When you meet with a client, you might discuss a brief in person, you might meet like someone, a person, a photographer, a content creator, you meet lots of different people, you bounce ideas off in person and you develop a campaign idea that is a winner. But when you don't have that, and for me as somebody who likes to be around people, I did struggle at first. And, you know, I like to go to art galleries to find inspiration. I love to go to events, and all of that kind of like social aspect helps me create great social media campaigns for clients. So that was tough, you know, that was very, very tough. And I had to navigate, like, how do I still find inspiration online? How can I still develop great campaign ideas? And we navigated to then having what we call a Power 30 at Stuff. So that's the name of my agency. And we just have 30 minutes on a Friday where we bounce ideas off each other. We have lunch together. we like pull up, I saw this video, we flip through books online together to try and replicate that feeling of campaign development that you have online. Because I think people often gloss over that ideation phase, but it's so important. If you're going to deliver a great campaign, there needs to be time where you pick apart the brief and you brainstorm, you bounce ideas, you challenge each other. So yeah, I think my toughest thing was trying to replicate that physical presence online.
It connects with a little bit of your work, Karen, in terms of that. How do you stay on top of taking care of yourself and that kind of mental health awareness through the process? So how has lockdown been for you and for the work that you do?
Yeah, Sophie, you really hit the nail on the head. Just trying to replicate the face-to-face, in-person dynamic online has been really challenging, and especially when the work I'm doing is specifically with people who are facing the brunt of marginalization, of oppression, and COVID, and any kind of events like this can really magnify those disadvantages and gaps in services. So, for example, when COVID hit, most of the people that I was working with were groups of migrants, asylum seekers, refugees, people who don't have access to public funds. And it was really challenging to be able to meet with them online, because a lot of them just didn't have access to computers or laptops, or even broadband, and data was, mobile data was very, very expensive for them to access. So that's definitely been something that's been really challenging for the work that I do in the organisation I work at. But alongside that, I've I mentioned I'm a recovery advocate, so I do a lot of work with people in recovery, and actually COVID has been kind of a blessing in disguise, because I've been able to organise with people from all around the world who are dealing with mental health struggles, addiction. It's been really eye-opening how previously I thought the recovery movement was very white dominated, and it is, but I've been able to meet with people all over the world, people of colour all over the world in recovery, and help each other to support each other. And so, whether it's setting up WhatsApp groups or Zoom calls, or Zoom meetings, or during times that are really difficult, during moments and events that are really difficult for people of colour, especially in the wake of the murder of George Floyd, and during the US elections, being able to meet with other people of colour in recovery all around the world and support each other that way has been really beneficial for me in terms of my mental health. So yeah, it's definitely been a mixed bag in terms of the impact I've personally experienced and the impact that it's had on the people that I've worked with.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, and in part, yeah, there is that double-edged sword of like you lose some of the physical stuff, but then you gain access to people that you never thought you'd be speaking to. That's really interesting. Kirstin, is that your experience as well in terms of that loss of the physical and gain of the digital space?
Yeah, definitely. I think particularly with my work with the Stove, we're a high street building, and it's really important to us to have that presence on the high street. And we have a cafe as well, so that's where we really engage and interact with people. And even though I'm kind of the behind the scenes person, there's always opportunities to meet with people and engage and talk about campaigns. And so, yeah, as soon as that was gone, it just became really challenging and really difficult. And I think a lot of social media managers, digital media people just felt that sense of dread, like my workload is about to increase. Yeah. So, but it was amazing. We took some time to really think about what we wanted to achieve, and reimagined a lot of our events so that we can cater to an online audience. And, in that way, we've been able to engage with a whole new audience, reach new people who are not just based in Dumfries, but out with the region, Scotland, beyond. So there's been a lot of advantages, but it has been challenging, and we're still trying to navigate how best to reach people. And I guess when we had that sort of restrictions lifted in October, we did a the Wild Goose Festival, and so that some of those events were online, some of them were in person. And I guess as we slowly come out of lockdown, we're really starting to think about how we are going to slowly get back into the real world, but still maintain a little bit of digital presence.
Yeah, that's an interesting conversation. Let's get to that in a little bit. But I guess in terms of that moment where we went into lockdown and then you could hear the screams of social media managers from across the country, what there is so much online and so much was transferred to the kind of digital space and events and content and engagement and all sorts of things. So if you're running a campaign that is primarily digital, how do you stand out? How do you reach people anymore in that crowded, like really busy and noisy space of online? What have you done? What's good practice that you've seen?
I think it's really important to realize that not everybody is going to like what you do. You can't appeal to everybody. It took me a long time to realize that, because you just want to be liked by everyone. And so I think once you realize that, it can really help you to define your audience, and then that can really help you target specific people who you want to engage in your campaign. So, you know, thinking about what's important about your campaign, what stands out, and really making sure that that message comes across, and making sure that your, you know, branding and identity is really strong. And I think that helps people engage with you more as well.
Be interested on other kind of perspectives on this. Any more thoughts?
Yeah, I think Kirstin hit the nail on the head. I think because social media, especially in the online world, is the World Wide Web. It's like literally it's in the name. It's worldwide. That can be daunting for people because they're like, I have to get everyone. And I think it's really important to find your.
Oh no! Did we lose Sophie?
Did I disappear?
Oh no! Can you hear us, Sophie?
Yeah.
Okay, I can hear you now. We got into some kind of multi-dimensional loop there, but I think we're back.
Literally, as I was talking about the World Wide Web, it was no, enter the matrix. But yeah, for me, it was like, you know, don't try and target everyone. Find a niche audience, because one thing that lockdown did bring back was this sense of community, because we weren't out there in the real world. There was this sense that we wanted to find connections online. And for all my clients, independent businesses, bigger brands that work with us as an agency, we said now's the time to develop that sense of community. Don't feel like you have to reach everyone now. We're in this collective experience of much grief, much loss, much change. Now is not necessarily the time to be talking about, hey, here's my fancy new, like whatever your product is. It's now time to connect on a human to human level. And yes, you can track that with things like engagement, you know, traffic to your website from social. But if you take that step back and think, actually, now as a brand or as a business, it's just about making human connection. Your campaign takes on a whole different element, because you're concentrating on how do I have authentic conversations with people online during a crisis. And that changes, because no longer are you maybe thinking about a paid advertising campaign. You might be thinking of a community building campaign or an outreach campaign, or, you know, where you're asking people questions, you're finding conversations that you can join. I think that was the real big thing for us in how to pivot running a campaign online during a pandemic, is let's just stop, let's hold up, let's acknowledge we're in this really, really, you know, almost once in a lifetime experience, and let's connect on a human to human level, so that when the pandemic is over, people are still part of your brand, because they're like, they were actually connected with me on a human level. And that changes, you know, the photography you use changes, the video you use, the copy you use changes, everything changes, because it's now needs to be human centered if it's going to work.
That makes total sense, and it feels maybe Karen, you could speak a little bit about this, because it feels very much like the campaign bootcamp approach in terms of building that community and kind of nurturing that community during this time. Is that kind of roughly what happened in the last year, like in terms of the work that you're all doing?
Yeah, that's what I wanted to pick up on actually, because I was thinking that as someone who works in the like charity sector and activist space, I wasn't I felt like there wasn't really going to be much synergy between my work and Kirstin and Sophie's, but actually what Sophie has just mentioned about community building is really vital, and helping people. And creating the spaces for people to come together and be in community has been really vital for us. And as a training organisation, our product, if you want to call it, is training, campaigning training, giving people the skills that they need to campaign. But actually, training spaces, both offline and online, are really great ways for people who are working on lots of different campaigns to come together and build that community. And that's what we've been really finding. And I've also been a beneficiary of campaign bootcamp's work. I was on the training, and what has really benefited me and been really useful for me is realizing that I might be working on a mental health campaign, but someone working on an environmental campaign, or someone working on a campaign against excessive policing in Black communities, for example, our campaigns might be really different, but there are lots of intersections between our work. And so in terms of dealing with the oversaturation of social media, community organizing and using those approaches and theories and methodologies online as well as offline can really help you find your people, and the people that are really going to be interested in what you have to share.
Totally. I want to pick up a little more on the differences between the kind of private sector and the kind of charity and activist kind of sector, and let's really get into the tensions and the differences here in our conversation. Maybe we can get into that a little bit. Could you tell me a little bit about a campaign that you admire, or a group that's done some kind of campaign before that you think it's good practice, is what people should be doing, and it kind of just is a good thing? I'd love to hear examples from everybody. Kirstin, do you have anything in mind that you could share?
I was thinking about this. I suppose a lot of the things that I think about are really music related, but one of the things that I really enjoyed seeing was the work of Tiny Changes. And they launched this fund last year to support new and existing projects to help improve services around mental health, young people aged under 30. I just thought that was delivered really well across social media, and they really engaged with a lot of people, and their selection panel was people under 30 as well. And another one was the work of Help Musicians, another music one. But they have been really vital support for musicians throughout the whole of the pandemic. And, they have been for years, but I think when the pandemic hit and there wasn't a lot of support for particular people who weren't able to access government funding, they had a lot of streams of funding for emerging artists, like hardship funds, different funds to create new projects, and they were just constantly putting things out. So I thought it was really amazing to see that level of support, and not only funding, they do a lot of support for mental health, physical health as well. So yeah, I think the work that they do is really great.
Totally. It seems like there was a lot of campaigns during that period that were about hardship funds and access to funding. That was a really key element. Cool, interesting. Karen or Sophie, do you have campaigns in mind that you could share?
Yeah, I can go next. A campaign that I really have been enjoying following is Charity So White. and it's a campaign run by an organisation called POC Impact, and their goal is to highlight the lack of racial diversity in the charity sector. And POC Impact is also an organisation that provides support and guidance and mentoring for people of colour who are working in the charity sector. So they really, like I mentioned before about community building, they really have an emphasis on building a community of people of colour who work in the charity sector, so that people can share their experiences and get support and advertise jobs and things like that. And they're also working to address a very serious issue in the charity sector, which is that there is a real lack of diversity, especially in senior leadership in charities. And they're very much involved in working with organisations or challenging organisations like national organisations that represent the charity sector in general on institutional racism and discrimination, and also challenging other charities. So when there's anything in the media where it's been revealed that there's been incidents of racial insensitivity or just plain racism in the charity sector, they're just really on it in terms of bringing that to light, and also making sure that the leaders of those organisations are being called to account. So I really have been enjoying the work and following the work that they're doing.
They're a great Twitter follow. Like, I feel they always have interesting stuff on there. That's cool. How about you, Sophie? Oh, are you? Sophie, can you hear me?
Funnily enough, I actually work. Yep, can you hear me?
Yes, you were just frozen for a second there. It's okay. It's back.
Am I there?
You're back.
Okay, perfect. It's back. And funnily enough, I actually worked on the Tiny Changes campaign that Kirstin was talking about. I worked with, Staff's worked with Tiny Changes on Tiny Gigs, which was a series of fundraising events over what would have been Glastonbury weekend. And I think the key on running that campaign was young people being involved in the programming of it. So the programming of the whole festival, young people were able to perform. It was young artists. We were online that whole weekend. And so it's great to hear that was one of your favorite campaigns. I think for me, last year was such an interesting year because so much happened. COVID, then you had, the murder of George Floyd. There was so much happening. And for me, it was the brands who understood that their place in this world wasn't just about sharing a black square or selling another pair of trainers. It was about, my product means nothing if I'm not making the world that the product is in a better place. So some of the campaigns that have really stood out for me, for example, are the first advert showing a breastfeeding mum, like a pregnant woman who was breastfeeding by Freedom Mom. So they're an American company. And it seemed just so simple, but this is just how, I don't want to say messed up advertising, and that's what I work in, but this is how backdated the advertising industry is. That the first time we're seeing a lactating woman, in an advert breastfeeding. And I think for me, those are always the campaigns that hit home. Like when Nike did their, Colin Kaepernick campaign to support him, or their Serena Williams, International Women's Day ad. I just think the campaigns that really hit are the campaigns that don't focus on, hey, here's our shiny product that is better than all the others. It understands its place in the world. And I think campaigns after 2020 are going to be under so much scrutiny because people are like, what is your position on the things happening in the world? Whether it's mental health, climate change, whether it's racism, sexism, ageism. I think the age of consumer campaign marketing has changed. And it's not enough to just have this, show-stopping campaign that features like the best videographer. people want to see, like, where do you stand and how are you going to use your campaign voice for good? And I think that for me is probably what I'm most excited about, because it's been a long time coming for this industry. We needed it because it was always buy, and no consideration about what are the things that are impacting your consumer. So like that advert where it's just a concept so simple as a breastfeeding mum, revolutionary, because we don't see that in campaigns. So for me, those were the campaigns, those type of campaigns were the ones that really hit home for me last year.
It's interesting because you touched on this. We kind of look for a sense of integrity with these brands, because last year there were so many gigantic companies who put the black square thing on, and you knew that they were just doing that because they had to, and it didn't come with any like specific actions. There was a really interesting bot that I don't know who built it actually on Twitter, that would every month tweet at people who have posted a black square saying, since you posted a black square, what have you done to change your organization and to improve the systems in your organization? And which was great, and I think it's still going. And so a bunch of organizations that have been inputted into the bot have to like monthly figure out how to deal with that.
That's fantastic, and that's the power of social media, Sam. Before there, a campaign went out and the public, other than phoning Ofcom or something, there was no way to show your disdain for it. But now, thanks to social media, like look at the Harry and Meghan interview. It was because of social media that collective come together, that people were like, no, like Piers is wrong. We're going to voice our concerns. And I think that's changed the way we do campaigns, because before you do a TV advert, a radio advert, out a billboard, and that's it. The public just have to deal with whatever you put out there. But in this kind of like backlash culture, I think marketing teams, marketing managers are realizing that, wow, the consumer is a complex human being with lots of cares. And it's not enough to just talk about how great our product is. People are going to come and ask questions.
Yeah, totally. Do you think there's in terms of like this kind of outrage that is generated, I think a lot of the times, like Charity So White, you can use that to bring attention to a cause, so like an interview comes out or like a particular thing that starts the conversation. Do you find that's been increasingly how people do activism online, Karen? Is there a kind of sense of, let's find opportunities in the collective conversation to try and ride that wave of enthusiasm, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I think it's a yes and no. I mean, there are lots of people and organizations who do use that as an opportunity to guide the conversation or create a conversation, and get people to ride the wave. But there's also people who are, especially grassroots campaigners, that are not necessarily on social media, or if they are, then it's not the way they organize, and so people who do grassroots campaigning are not necessarily part of the conversation in that way, or part of the outrage. I mean, a lot of us use social media for our own personal reasons, and to connect with friends, to see what's happening in the world, to have a laugh at the shenanigans going on Black Twitter or what have you, but and not necessarily as a campaigning tool. So yeah, I feel like it's a bit of a yes and no. There are some people that use it as a way of generating conversation, outrage, likes, retweets, and guiding the way the conversation goes. But then also, for people who are doing grassroots activism, that's not necessarily the tool that they might use.
Yeah, totally. That makes sense. So I wanted to, on this topic of campaigns that you admire and the direction that they've taken, what do you think are the kind of key, I guess I framed this question as the key advice you would give to someone starting a campaign, one especially kind of in a semi like lockdown where it has to be predominantly online, and they don't necessarily have the backing of a huge following or of a big organization or a big company, which I think is possibly the case. And I'd love for people to send in questions if this is the situation you're in the chat. But freelancers and people kind of who are kind of just recently getting involved with causes that don't necessarily have a huge community around it. What would your advice be to someone in that position as they're starting a campaign? Anyone?
Yeah, I can offer something. So I can't speak to freelancers or people who are doing any kind of, or selling a product or any, but some people that are working on campaigns that are more cause based, social justice based. I guess my advice is to go slowly, and that's definitely the approach that I've taken, because it really helps me, or really has helped me, build relationships and build that community that we've been talking about. So really going slowly in terms of not necessarily focusing on increasing the followers or creating a tweet that goes viral, but really focusing on building community with like-minded people who are working or doing work in similar issues that you're working in. And so, for example, with my work in people of color in nature, it started off as a Facebook group a few years ago, and it really helped me to unfold a world of environmental campaigners of color, people who are working on nature connections, who are people of color, and people who are just really interested in the environment. And so, if I had started off a campaign at the beginning saying I'm gonna create a campaign to get people of color to be more interested in nature, then I don't think it would have worked, because I wouldn't have had those relationships, that credibility, that trust in people, trust in and trust from the community that I'm seeking to work with. So for me, it's definitely about finding ways to go slow and build those deep-rooted communities that are based on trust and sharing resources and nourishing each other and sharing insights and talking on the phone occasionally, or sharing events and things like that. So for me, it's a very slow process.
That's great, because it's a kind of counter, like, viral culture. You're not trying to immediately create a thing that you're like, oh, this is gonna generate a huge controversy. It's quality over quantity, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And that's how organizations can build trust with communities that might not necessarily engage with them, because I found last year, in the summer of Black Square Summer, people coming into my inbox asking me to do things or share things, and I didn't know who those people were, so it was very off-putting for me. But if it was organizations or people that I had worked with and built trust with before, then that would have been a lot more, I would have been a lot more willing to say yes to things, and that's what happened for me. So yeah, building trust and going slowly.
That's really interesting. And Kirstin, I guess that touches a little bit on the kind of thing that the Stove does, and both since lockdown, but also in its physical presence in Dumfries, that it is very much about building a community kind of thing. So do those points resonate with the work you're doing?
Yeah, it completely. And I was just thinking about that community and how important it is to the work that we do. And I think it's really important for anybody thinking about doing a campaign to realise that it doesn't actually matter how big your following is. It's about how actively engaged your following is with what you're doing. And I really think the best advice is for somebody just to make use of that following and making sure that you're communicating with them. Obviously, they're following you for a reason. But yeah, it really is about building that community and building your engagement through that. I guess another piece of advice I'd offer is, if it is possible to outsource, like a graphic designer, a copywriter, web builder, I do think those things are important. Obviously money dependent, and in that way as well, you're offering opportunities to the creative freelance community as well, which I think is really important. And then you're kind of building your own sort of community behind this campaign, and you have a support network there. I think for a lot of the the clients that I have, having that support network is hugely important, because I don't think I could get through like the last year if we weren't all there supporting each other and just being there to help each other when it's important. And yeah, I guess it kind of goes back to what I'd said earlier about your branding. It's so important that you're consistent with that, and people are able to get a clear message of what it is that you're doing, whether you're promoting an event or a project or selling a product. The more consistent you are with that, I think the easier it is to kind of reach a really good audience.
That's really helpful. How about you, Sophie? What would your advice be? Or advices?
Yeah, I think it's definitely to remember that creativity matters. I think often when you're working on a campaign, it's so easy to get caught up on metrics and performance, like, you know, how many people downloaded or bought, which is important. You know, you've got to have an objective to your campaign. But especially for freelancers, you know, often when you're working within an organization, you can get entrenched by internal politics, how things have always been done, your day-to-day job, and you don't have the time to think about the creative and the creativity. And I think that's what creatives can bring. And I would encourage anyone who is a freelancer and working on a campaign, is you have that creative eye that the organization and the brand might not necessarily have time to invest in. So really, really big up your creative ideas, explain the process of why you believe that creative execution is right, and really stand your ground, because creativity does matter in campaigns, and it's what is going to eventually make your campaign stand out against the noise of everyone else who is doing campaigns. And it can, you know, there's so many tools, you know, even if you don't have like this huge budget, if you think outside of the box, there are ways to do things relatively cost effective, like using the Tiny Changes example. You know, if we had done that physical festival, 2-day festival with all those artists in person, it would have cost us hundreds of thousands of pounds, and as a small charity it just wouldn't have been possible. But thinking about, right, how can we do it online in a different format? So doing it as a Facebook festival during lockdown, it meant that we could have fun with the creative. We could make like graphics, we could have, you know, some cheeky tongue-in-cheek like social media moments, because we've taken that pressure off of it's got to be this huge thing, like because I think the word campaign can sometimes instill fear in people. It's like a campaign is this big scary thing, but if you think about, actually this is just a chance for us to creatively speak to our audience, it does help. And one thing that I'm really doing at the moment is surrounding myself with offline things, so like books off eBay, old magazines, you know, I collect sticks. When I'm walking around, just collect sticks and stuff and moss, and just that reconnection with creativity, I think helps, especially if you're working with a digital campaign or your social media manager. It's so easy to just get caught in the metrics and the performance and the being online and forget about the creative. And that's one thing I'd love us to start doing more of, is valuing the creative process and how much creativity does matter.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to come back to creativity in a campaign, but before I do, I guess I'm just interested, for Karen and Kirstin, what is your version of finding sticks and finding books, and what's your kind of creative recharge and inspiration? Where do you find that?
For me, well, I guess because I work as a photographer as well, like the thing that really helped me through lockdown was just going out and doing photography. All my photography work just cancelled as soon as the lockdown started, which was really upsetting. So I just kind of tried to find other ways in which I could be creative with photography and just try to keep creating but not put myself under pressure, which was really nice actually, because it wasn't a job, it wasn't work. I just had creative freedom over that. But I never thought about collecting sticks. I do think that's really lovely, and I kind of wish I'd done that now.
How about you, Karen?
Something I realised that I love doing is picking up the phone and calling people. And for a long time I had this identity of being a millennial, and so being allergic to phone calls. And
Yeah.
if someone calls you, it's like, why are you calling me? Just send me a text. But I in lockdown, I really realized how much of a lifeline phone calls are, to the point where I can't build an authentic relationship with people via text these days. I just can't do it, because just being able to hear another person's voice, and the tones of the turns of phrases, their tone, the different. It's just a way of being able to connect with people when you're not able to do so face to face.
And after a year of Zoom calls, like, you start appreciating phone calls so much more, where you don't have to like be acting in a certain way and looking at yourself. And yeah, that's really interesting. Just coming back, Sophie, to that point that you made about creativity in a campaign, you can anonymize this answer, or you can choose to not answer for everybody, I guess. But what does a bad example of a campaign look like? Because the moment you said that, I could think of several campaigns in my head that just totally didn't have that creativity, that like original vision of, a group of people or a person, and it was a very kind of corporate, like using a meme from 10 years ago kind of thing. So what I guess I'm just interested in everybody's experience of like, what's a thing that you've seen campaigns do that you're like, that's not how you should go about doing it.
Oh, absolutely. I could like reel off like literally thousands. And I love it, because at the same time, clients, I'm going to try and put this clients think that their creative idea, like, I've had this idea, like you said, I saw this meme and it went viral and we should make a campaign out of it. And it's like, okay, like what else? Like what else do you have? And I think it's so easy to think like every idea will work in a campaign. And I think because you've seen it work somewhere else, or we saw this business do it, and then you end up, every campaign looks the same. Like every financial services provider has the same sort of campaign, like someone riding on a bike with their Visa card or their like MasterCard in their hand. It's like all the same. And I think this is where diversity,
No, that was a scary last second. Okay, I think Sophie's still in the call.
Any luck today? Just
Okay.
no luck at all. So yeah,
We just heard you gasp and disappear. So,
she's
yeah.
she's that disgusted. Yeah, so for me, this is why diversity matters so much, because if you want your campaign to be different, bring in different voices, look at different sectors, look at the way campaigns are run in different countries. So we're doing a campaign now for Coca-Cola Africa, and just in that process, you see that the way that they brand and talk, and the energy and the vitality that comes through in the continent of Africa just isn't reflected in corporate Coca-Cola ads here in the Western world. And this is where diversity could really cut through. And because it is the same people creating the same ads, the same campaigns, we get lost in this cycle of sameness. And I just think that, if you're an organization, if you are a freelancer, if you're an agency, if you're a campaign manager, get out of the habit of looking at the world in one linear way, and start to go into different communities, hold focus groups. That's one thing that we did for a client. We just held a focus group and had a real reflection of ages, sexualities, just like a whole range of people come in and give the feedback on the campaign. And it was fantastic, because all of a sudden now we're having all these different inputs put into the work, and you realize that this idea of doing a meme wasn't actually strong enough, because everyone wants to be creative, everyone thinks that they have what they need, but ultimately what makes a creative concept strong enough to make us remember it is actually because a lot of thought has gone into that process. And things like focus groups, things like testing, things like going and see what's happening in other industries, other markets, other segments, you know, really, 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 really works well to give your, you know, campaign like that creative edge. And like, you know, I will, you know, just because we're talking about it, you know, the Tiny Gigs example, it worked because we could have just done a poster, but we were like, let's pretend this is a real festival and let's go and look at old festival lineup posters. What do they look like? And bring in that element of, wow, this we could have just done a poster like, hey, join us online at this date, but actually replicate that feeling of being at a festival. So yeah, I think go out there, expand, speak to people, and just see what else is happening in the world.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And it's funny because it keeps coming back to community, huh? It keeps coming back to like building relationships with people, listening to them, implementing their vision. Like that's fascinating. Any other bad examples from anyone, or like, or not specific examples, but like bad practice that you've seen around in campaigns?
I wasn't going to share about like an activist or charity example, but one of the things that I've noticed is sometimes it feels like some private companies employ people to scroll through Black Twitter and copy the language that people use, and you know, the turns of phrases, and you know, African American vernacular English, and then when you see it on you know, an ad where they're selling trainers or, you know, sportswear, it doesn't seem authentic somehow.
Yeah.
And so I feel like it is really important to seek out worlds and communities that are outside of the usual advertising or PR bubble, but also doing it in a way that is authentic. If you're not hiring people of color or Black people to be in the room with you, but you're, you know, copying the language that we're using on social media, then it's just not going to be authentic, and it's just not going to fit. So I think that's key, like being authentic in how the importance of authenticity when seeking out diverse audiences.
There's a really good Twitter account called Brands Saying They, and it's just like examples of like brands trying to be like just like too much dad humor it ends up coming across as, but yeah, it's brilliant. Kirstin, anything from your end on that?
Yeah, nothing really specific, but I would really reiterate what Karen and Sophie say, and that, you know, there is, you know, the whole like going viral thing, like it's not possible for everyone to do that, and really just it's not about, you know, having X amount of followers or whatever. And sometimes I feel like you can really notice when somebody's just dying to get more followers and dying to increase all their engagement, and you can tell it's not authentic when that kind of comes across. And then the only thing that's going to happen is they're not going to engage with the people that they want to. And yeah, I have seen quite a lot of copying or things like that. And I read something earlier about how it's so great that if you're thinking about creating your own campaign, to look at other people's work and take inspiration, but not copy, obviously. But sometimes I do see it happen, which is a shame, but I think it's very noticeable when it does happen.
Yeah, it touches on the point you were making earlier that, you know, you should be bringing people in, like illustrators and designers and artists or whatever, and, you know, paying them and making them part of your thing, like, because it's, you see so much of people borrowing from so many different things, and no one is compensated fairly. And that's a really good point.
You know what else I hate, Sam?
Yeah.
I know I run a social media agency, but hashtags. Everyone feels like if your campaign doesn't have a hashtag, it's like it's going to be a fail. I'm like, no, people don't use social media, the internet like that. Let's stop with the hashtag. And like I did one, and it was like, okay, I'm going to change the name. Let's say it was the Future of Plumbing Conference. And they were like, why don't we call it like the FOC Conference 2021? I'm like, who is actually going to put that? And they put the hashtag on the campaign posters. Like no one uses hashtags like that. That's one thing I wish we could just stop, like right now. It's like every campaign having to have a hashtag. I hate it.
We need to clip you saying this and put it online, because I think a lot of people need to hear it. That's so good. But you're right. I never like wake up, make coffee, and go like, let me check my favorite hashtag. Like, yeah, that's so funny. Okay, that's really helpful. Let's talk a little bit about ethics. I think there's an interesting situation nowadays where a lot of the mediums, that we mentioned tonight, like Facebook and Twitter and like other kind of online platforms, tend to be run by people who make lots of decisions that we probably disagree with, or who kind of end up not being kind of doing great practices ethically in terms of the people that work for them, or the privacy policies, or anything like that. How do you engage with ethics when, especially over lockdown, it's so much harder to reach people? Like, I don't know if there is an ethical social media platform that people use much, so how do you kind of square that in your campaign with your work? Like, how do ethics come into it, I suppose, to everyone, whoever wants to take it?
I guess, like, yeah, social media platforms do pose a lot of challenges, and we see them all the time. And it's tricky because obviously Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, they're all questionable, but they're the most effective marketing tools, most effective way of reaching people, sharing news. I guess it's important that if you're going to use those platforms, just to make sure that your values and your ethos is communicated through what you're doing. I get, like, something that I've picked up on a lot is, on Instagram, a lot of things that are coming out that are bad for your mental health, like seeing certain things that can be quite impactful for people. And it, things just like checking what you're putting out is not impacting people. Maybe even like creating guidelines around what you're sharing online, and just being mindful of the content that you're putting out. Like enforcing policies around data privacy and plagiarism and things as well.
Yeah. Well, anyone else has a take on that question?
Yeah, I feel like using social media is a bit of a thorny issue, especially as a community builder that has built a community that's specifically for people of color, because those kinds of communities can be targets for people who don't want that to happen. And for example, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, they all have different ways of censoring people of colour who are activists and who are speaking out against racism. So it can be a very difficult issue that I still haven't come up with a solution to, or for an answer to, for my own community. But in terms of what I'm seeing other people doing, other people are moving to other communities and other apps and other platforms, because it just gives them a lot more control over what they can and can't do and say, and how they can use their community. And also it gives them more opportunities to create events and share resources. And so I'm seeing, that's what I'm seeing now. Now people shifting from Facebook and using other platforms like Mighty Networks and Mobilize and things like that, that people feel are is more autonomous and helps them be able to say what is on their mind authentically.
Because I guess in that kind of activist networks, there is a genuine concern for actual surveillance and all sorts of things like that. That's really interesting. How about you, Sophie? How does it come into your work?
Yeah, it's a tough one, because when I started Stuffs, I was really like, I want this to be an ethical marketing agency, because I'd worked in agencies that weren't so ethical and had done stuff like bought followers, or like, shipped work out to Vietnam or the Philippines and China. And there's nothing wrong with doing that. but there is a problem if you're doing that just because you want to pay people pennies. So I always was like, at the core of everything stuff does is I want our values to come through. So, we have a diversity and inclusion policy, we have a mental health policy. And I think ultimately, without getting too into the political side of things, these platforms were started and no one knew where they were going to go. If we think about Facebook like 20 years ago, Twitter 15 years ago, Instagram 10 years ago, it's very different from the platform that they are now, which is, it's a media platform. It is a media platform. It's a global media platform with billions of people on it. And because of that, the same level of organic community that we had in the beginning just can't be expected now. And I think it's understanding the good and the bad, and knowing that you don't have to be on every platform, and that you can pick and choose which one works for your campaign, but also recognizing that there is still the ability to reach people en masse. And you can't take that away from social media. There is that ability to meet people en masse. And it's more about how do you make sure that the messaging that you have is inclusive. It encourages people, like Cousin said as well, to take mental health breaks. That your team who are delivering the work, especially as social media managers and digital marketing teams, or digital campaigners or advocators, that your mental health is in place. You have a policy within your organization, and for people who might be targeted for online abuse. Like, how do you deal with these things? Do you have a zero tolerance policy? People say things on your platform or under your campaign. Like, how do you make sure that no, this is not what we stand for? Because I think it's very easy for us to see the Facebooks of the world and the Zuckerbergs as like evil cyborgs who are here to like ruin humanity, but they're just here to make a ton of money. And at the end of the day, would I be on this Zoom call if it wasn't for technology? There are good things about it, and I think it's about how can you make the best of what you have. So that's how we manage it. But we also, there's lots of guidance out there. So for example, the ICO, which is the Information Commissioner's Office, there's lots of guidance there about how to create, things that apply in terms of data protection. There's the Advertising Standards Authority, which have guidance. So there are these bodies, who are there to try and make these platforms as ethical as possible. But I think in terms of us as practitioners, as organizations, as business owners, we've got to think about how our ethics apply to everything that we do. And it might be that we don't have complete control of these platforms, but we're making sure that in all other areas, we're bringing through like good ethics in the work that we do. And it's things like paying people on time, charging people like good rates, like making sure that you share the pie and you don't, farm out work to foreign countries because you see them as, cheap labor. It's all of these things, working with your local community, local photographers, do you recruit, women photographers, women makeup artists, women's art directors? Do you do what you can to try and recruit disabled copywriters or disabled creative technologists? I think we can't control the platforms, but we can control the other decisions that we make day to day in the delivery of our campaigns, stuffs. That's what we try and do, because ultimately we're a social media agency. We are part of the beast. We're part of this big machine that goes around. But how can we make our little corner of the big beast just a little bit better for the world that we live in?
Yeah, that's really interesting. I just want to go back to something you mentioned there in terms of starting a campaign. I think sometimes there's a temptation to let's create an account in every social media platform. Can you tell me just a little bit more about that? So should people stay away from that let's make one of everything type?
Oh, absolutely. Like, how many clients have we had say, sorry if any clients have listened to this, started TikTok for us. I'm like, why do you want a TikTok? You can just give me 3 good reasons why you want a TikTok. It's like a couple of years ago, everyone wanted a Snapchat. RBS, like everyone. It's like, RBS, who are you talking to on Snapchat? Like, everyone wants it. And I always tell clients, be on the platform that makes sense for you, or run the campaign on the platform that makes sense for you. So if you're doing a corporate B2B campaign, you have no business being on TikTok with like 17-year-olds. You need to be on LinkedIn, you need to be on Twitter. So it's hard because there is this idea that you're missing out, that, you know, if you're not on all these platforms because it's trending, because, you know, Pepsi or whoever did this ad that we, who are insurance broker, in our growth, we need a TikTok as well. So I always try and tell people, be on the platform that makes sense for you. And you know, what I like to do is usually like bring insights. So be like, you know, the key customer for TikTok is this age, this demographic. You told us that your key customer is this age, this demographic. You don't need to be there. So some of the insights, if my Google search history could show how many times I'm like, demographic for Snapchat, so I could just show people when planning the campaign that you don't need to be like on these platforms. And like on top of that as well, like the platforms have so many functionalities. Like there's now reels on Instagram, LinkedIn does videos, like Twitter has spaces, there's Clubhouse, there's so many. And I think even if you decide on a platform to use for your campaign, you don't have to do everything. You don't have to do the IGTV, the IG Live, the IG organic post, the reels. You don't have to do it all. Even within the platform, there's so many options. So think about what you actually want to achieve, who you actually want to target, and then base your platform strategy for your campaign based on that.
I'm going to spend the rest of my evening looking RBS up on TikTok and seeing what comes up. I am obsessed. That's my new hobby. I have a couple more questions, but if anyone in the chat has questions, this is the time to throw them in, and I'll be sure to mention that before we finish. But before we get there, I wanted to, I guess, I'll tell you my last question first so you can like mentally prepare for that. But my last question is about resources, and if there are, whether it's like articles or websites or people to follow or anything like that, they would recommend people check out in terms of like campaign guidance or tips or insights or whatever it is, whatever that may be. So, but you can have a think about that. Before we get there, I wanted to talk a little bit about that mental health and that like self-care side of it, because I think a lot of campaigns can be very involved, you know, and you can have things on your phone kind of blowing up all the time, and it's hard to kind of separate one from the other. And yeah, I think they can, especially during lockdown, your whole world can become that campaign that you're running because your whole world is your phone and your laptop or whatever. So how do you, what kinds of strategies do you put in place to look after yourself? How do you do it personally? How would you advise people to do it in the middle of a campaign? Anyone?
For me, I think the best thing that I've ever done is setting boundaries, like both with clients and just with myself. You know, if you're working with a client, like for me, because I'm freelance and I've got lots of different people that I work with, I try and make it really clear, like about my schedule, like what days I'll work and you know, when they know that I'll be in contact with them. And I just think it really helps people know that you're just not available 24/7 to do things. And just, you know, boundaries with myself, such as like I won't work past a certain time, or I'm not going to check my emails at a certain time, because it's so easy. Just once you open one email, you reply to it, and you reply to another, and you're on social media and replying to messages, and it's just so easy just to get into that routine, and it can be quite unhealthy, I found. And then yeah, like setting a routine for yourself. I'm sure the lockdown has made everybody sleep late or work from bed or stay in pajamas all day. And I've just found that if I have a routine, like it sounds so simple, but if I just have that routine, it's just makes my life so much easier. And then I can really switch off at the end of the day or have a proper weekend. And it just makes me feel so much better. And then the last thing that I think, and it sounds like it should be a given, but it's not, and it's just to go easy on yourself. And I think it's a really difficult thing to do when you are a creative or you work in the creative industries, because there's this like constant idea that you need to be creating all the time and putting out things all the time, but you don't. And I think it's really easily forgotten And also, yes, we're going through a global pandemic, so we kind of need to be kind to ourselves. So yeah, they're like my top things that make life easier for me.
Yeah. How about you, Sophie?
Well, first, I need to work out how to use my phone. It's even my phone. Yeah, so things that I do, because again, it's so easy because my job, I've been working in social media for the last 10 years, and I had a huge mental health crisis. And I noticed that, like, honestly, like I can't remember what thing it was at the time, started to bend one way because I was constantly tweeting. I was like, whoa. We need to put a cap here, put a boundary. So I don't have my work email on my phone. I have to literally log in, go to www. whatever the website is to log in. Because again, once that notification hits, I have all notifications off my phone. The team that deliver social media work, they don't log into any client accounts. And what they do is they manage everything through Hootsuite. There's lots of scheduling tools that you can use, like Hootsuite, Plannable, Plannerly, there's loads. You can use that so that on your phone is just your personal social media. And then when you're finished for the day, close. We now, like, so if you can afford to, there's lots of independent counselors whose workload has also gone down. So we offer 1 free hour of counseling to staff. It helps support this amazing organization called Brave Your Day in Glasgow, and provides them with more work, but also provides the team a safe space where they can talk about their mental health. Setting boundaries with clients, I found that very hard, especially as a woman, especially as a Black woman. I find it very hard. But I was like, so you have to set these boundaries for you and your team. And just remembering that campaigns will bomb, like every single remember Pepsi and Kendall Jenner? Is it Kendall? Yeah, Kendall Jenner. Like even the guys with billions of pounds get it wrong. So take that pressure off yourself, because when a campaign hits, there's this pressure that, oh, is it going to be a success? What if no one likes it? But listen, if Pepsi can fail, then you should not be worried about anything. So take that pressure off yourself. I mean, it's one thing failing and then having to explain to your client why you failed. But remember, at the end of the day, no one died, or at least I hope no one died from your campaign. But I always remind my team, and I know, again, if clients listening, I'm like, I'm sorry, but it's like, it's just social media. Like, we're not saving the world. Like, we're not out there, like, in Syria, saving displaced communities. Like, we're literally just doing social media campaigns. It's not the end of the world. If it bombs, if you need to take time off, if it goes out late, again, I'm really sorry to my clients if they're listening to this, but it really isn't the end of the world. And I think happy people create happy work. And that, for me, as the founder of Stuffs, is the most important thing. If I have a happy team, they will create happy work, and the success will follow.
Oh, cool. Thank you. Karen, how about you?
Yeah, one of the things I was thinking about is not directly related to mental health and self-care, but when you create a strategy for your campaign, then you know what it is that you've already planned in advance, what it is you're going to do and what you're not going to do. And so that can really, especially when you're campaigning on social justice issues, for me anyway, there can be a tendency to just want to take everything on and say yes to everything. But if you have a clear strategy for your campaign, or you just have a clear vision for your life as a campaigner, then it can help me, it can make me find it a lot easier to say no to things that doesn't necessarily fit into that, and that really helps with my mental health. But I think in terms of like things that are related to mental health, for me, it's really important to craft a morning routine. Even if it you just start off by saying that every morning you're going to meditate for 10 minutes, or just sit in silence for 10 minutes, and then once that becomes a habit, then I find that it can be really useful to add small things to the morning routine. So for me, I really like prayer, meditation, reading spiritual literature or any kind of literature that I find inspiring. meditation in community is really helpful for me as well. So look up your local Buddhist center and see if they have any morning meditation classes that you can go to. And so I find that for me, if I don't practice my morning routine, then I might as well just say goodbye to the rest of the day because I'm not getting anything done. So yeah, it really is important to have that routine where I'm checking in with myself and who I am and what I stand for, even before I've checked my phone. And even for me, like a couple of years ago, I had these big ambitions that I was going to go on a retreat every quarter, and then COVID hit, and then that put paid to my retreat every quarter ambitions. But
Yeah.
even if, just for a week, trying to replicate retreat conditions at home, I find that can be really nourishing. Even doing it amongst work, you can come up with a plan, come up with a routine where, for me, it's really helpful, again, to have that morning routine, to have a week where I'm not checking any kind of social media, unless it's for very, very the things that I need to check it for. Just really limiting my consumption of the news in that time. So even if it's just for a week, just being able to do some of the things that you might do if you were to go on a retreat at home has been really helpful for me.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And it's, yeah, like touched on what Sophie and Kirstin were saying as well, that it's about boundaries, right? It's about like drawing a line and saying the morning is the time that I do this, the weekend is yeah, it's setting those boundaries. Cool. So on the resources, where would you point people to? Is there any place that you might think is helpful for people starting campaigns or kind of early on in that process?
Yeah, so some great resources to use is if you're not a graphic designer or you don't have the tools to work with a graphic designer, there's a great tool called Canva, and it allows you to, yeah, come up with templates for social media. They have some like literally one set up for campaigns like new product launch, an event, and the templates are updated regularly. So it's Canva, which is a great resource if you don't have access to a designer or you don't have design skills yourself. Another like great resource to look at is the Chartered Institute of Marketing. So they always like send like free blogs, sign up to their newsletters. And then the third thing I always say is like, be curious, go out there. And if you don't work marketing, you can feel very overwhelmed, and sometimes the best way to learn is just by observing. So go and look at ads, go online, like watch watch marketing managers, agencies speak online about how they deliver campaigns. Just look at campaigns, note what do you like about it. If you see an advert on TV, just get a pen and paper, like what do you like about this? Like, how do you think they've done that? Be really, really inquisitive and have that inquiring eye. And then Google. So Google, for their sins, they have an amazing training program called Google Academy, and it's completely free. And they do workshops around writing a strategy, how to track results from a campaign, like how to do paid advertising, obviously on Google, but you can take those principles and apply it to all the other platforms. So those are kind of like the tips and the tricks that I use. And then the famous questions: who, what, why, when, and how. Always ask yourself, and where. Ask yourself, for example, who do you want to speak to? Why do you want to speak to them? Where will they see you? When do you want to speak to them? And that's really the secret sauce to what we do at Stuffs. We always start a campaign by asking those questions, and starting with the who, the what, the why, the when, the how, the where. And once we've kind of fleshed out that, then we can go into the ideas process. So it can sometimes feel, if you don't work in marketing, that it's this scary beast. But really, I shouldn't say this, but it's really not. It's really not that scary. It's just about knowing what you're doing and experimenting until you get the recipe that works for you.
Yeah, and no hashtags, of course.
No hashtags.